Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today, Charles Hernick, the Director of Advocacy and Policy for CRES in Washington, D.C. Charles, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure. The Center for Responsible Energy Solutions.
So it's Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions.
Oh, it's Citizens.
That's it. And we're a relatively young organization, so if you're struggling to get the words out, that's okay. We were founded just a couple of years ago, really to promote more action right of center when it comes to clean energy policies, thinking of new ideas and advocacy to make sure that, well, elected officials are aware of what their constituents are interested in. And so far, so good. I've been with the organization for just under a year, so it's been a great change of pace for me.
So what are some of the really key areas that you're focusing on in terms of, for example, energy policy?
Sure. Well, energy touches all of us in a lot of different ways. And when it comes to energy policy specifically, we've been very engaged, and even since day one, it was maybe 2 days after I joined the team that the president was deciding whether or not to stay in or leave the Paris Climate Accord. So we were in deep with that right away and made some visits to the White House to chat with folks about that decision. We were trying to encourage the president to stay in but renegotiate, and the outcome is that they're still negotiating, but with kind of 1 foot out the door. So we can count that as a partial win, since we at least still have a seat at the table. But more recently, the massive tax reform that happened right at the end of 2017, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions was a major player in being a trusted voice for Republicans and working with conservatives to make sure that clean energy is getting equal treatment when it comes to the tax code. And that tax code reform hits all of us in our pocketbook, for many of us in a very good way, and we wanted to make sure that energy was not put at a comparative, that clean energy was not put at a comparative disadvantage as a result of that tax reform.
And so, talk about some of the outcomes of that, especially in terms of the extension of the ITC and those kind of policy issues.
Sure, and I'm glad that you bring that up. The investment tax credit and production tax credits exist for clean energy, particularly for wind and solar. And there was an agreement that was reached in 2015, bipartisan agreement that said that we should have subsidies and tax credits for wind and solar investment and production. And that over time that would decrease, that subsidy would decrease. And everybody was on board with that. And when the tax reform was being undertaken, every penny needs to be looked at. And so there was every reason to take a look at those tax breaks and decide whether or not to roll them back early or not. But for the purposes of market certainty and assuring a level playing field, Republicans in Congress saw eye to eye with us and with other folks who are working in the field and decided to maintain those tax credits as they were historically. But there were other major benefits, too, associated with that tax reform. The lower corporate tax rate.
Well, let's jump back to,
sure.
I think, but there was also something done that really was even more significant in that, for example, the investment tax credit, which pretty much applies to the solar field, the production tax credit, which pretty much applies to the wind side, were being renewed every year with tax reform. I think it's a 5-year term?
Yeah, five-year deal. And so really what it does is it provides certainty for the market in terms of what that decreasing tax credit scale will look like.
Right.
And that's good because it allows planners and investors to be able to make sound decisions knowing that Washington isn't going to change the rules of the game halfway through.
Right, and before they were operating, it was pretty much year to year, wasn't it, for the most part?
It can be a big challenge, and I think it's the challenge overall with looking at tax breaks and tax credits, and certainly there are other types of clean energy production that are fighting that year-to-year battle still to this day. Small-scale hydro and biomass and biofuels are among the many smaller renewable or clean energy production types that got a 1-year tax benefit, and it was retroactive to 2017. But it's a sloppy way to play when you're trying to work on tax credits. And so that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to articulate what are the benefits of those tax breaks for helping emerging technologies get up and off the ground. But I'm a firm believer that Uncle Sam doesn't need to subsidize well-established technologies, and I think that part of the good news is that wind and solar really are there in terms of where their price points are, the scalable technologies that have been deployed across the country. And we're seeing that the economics really have changed and that those tax credits won't be as important in 5 years as they were 5 years ago.
From a Republican perspective, in terms of a free market perspective, wouldn't it make sense to say, let's look at a glide path that eliminates all subsidies, not just for solar or wind, but for oil and gas as well?
Definitely, and that's part of the conversation that we're interested in having, and I think that oil and gas folks are getting that too, and those tax credits that exist for oil and gas, should be on the table, and I think that when Americans are best served when markets are competing and technologies are competing on a level playing field, and really that's what we're looking for. And the markets have developed to the point where we should be able to do that and keep more money in the taxpayer's pocket instead of transferring it from taxpayers to corporations.
How about, for example, severance taxes? I mean, if you're an oil or gas company and you're doing production in federal lands, I think the typical royalty you pay is something on the order of 12.5% or so. We had the minister, the petroleum and energy minister of Norway on the show. They have a 78% effective rate. Their severance tax rate is on the order of 78%. If you do a deal now with almost any foreign nation, and of course most of the oil production outside of the U.S. is controlled by the country itself, and not a private company. Again, you see royalty rates in the 25 to even 80% range. Is that something are American citizens, American taxpayers giving away too much when it comes to severance taxes here in the U.S.?
That's a good question, and to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not an expert on severance taxes, but we do need to think about how royalties that we're maintaining are being utilized. And I think that one of the interesting discussions that is being reinvigorated is that conversation of how public lands are being used, how natural resources, underground fossil fuel resources are being developed and utilized. And on the one hand, if that royalty is high, we have the potential to recover a lot of money off of public lands, unless people choose not to develop on public lands. And so right now, Department of Interior is very much having that debate as to what's the right price point so that you get folks to develop natural resources. Americans benefit by virtue of collecting that revenue and being able to reinvest in our nation's parks, which are in desperate need of reinvestment. So it gets a little bit complicated, but it's a discussion that is certainly well worth having.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Charles in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back. We're with Charles Hernick, the Director of Policy and Advocacy for Citizens for Responsible, what is it? Citizens for
Responsible Energy Solutions. It's a mouthful. That's why we just go by CREST sometimes.
Well, no. I mean, we're familiar with another group that has a very similar acronym, to put it politely. That's energy related.
That's true.
And so I'm almost always saying that, and I don't mean to. But anyway,
That's good.
yeah, I'd be interested in your take, because you've been involved in the political realm, on kind of the environmental movement and where it is today, and
Yeah.
how much the average citizen today is concerned about or even focused on the environment, and how much do we just take for granted?
Yeah. Aaron, that's a great question, and for me it touches it strikes a personal tone. I ran for Congress in 2016 in Northern Virginia and got an answer to that question very specifically. I'm a lifelong person who's worked in energy and environment, and as the 2016 election season was coming on, I was among the many people that was frustrated with the options that we had on the table. And in my specific district, I wanted to make sure that there was a voice, a Republican and conservative voice that was being responsive to those energy and environmental issues that you just mentioned. And I was pleasantly surprised. At the end of the day, folks are busy. They got to keep track of the kids, get the dogs on a walk, get everybody to school back in time, and stay up to speed on The Bachelor. There's a lot that folks are needing to deal with. And energy sometimes is at the top of that, hierarchy, but sometimes not. Mostly we pay our bills and we don't think too much about energy. But you see more and more with conversations about climate change that people really are interested in clean energy solutions. And at the end of the day, nobody wants to see, everybody wants air that's breathable, waters that are swimmable and fishable, because that's the way that we do interact with our environment. And I think that across the board, across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, Independents really do understand the issue and want to see more when it comes to clean energy.
So what are some of the specific solutions that CRES is proposing that are different from what's been out there before?
Sure. Critical areas is that we want to be able to empower individuals to be able to make choices about their energy consumption. Once upon a time, you'll remember that the telecom industry, you had one telecom provider, and now we live in an era where everyone's attached to their phone, and the market has completely evolved. And I think that our grandparents couldn't possibly imagine how telecommunications could be a sexy subject, but it really is. And I think that you're starting to see an evolution in the energy market where people are concerned not just with the quantity of the energy that they're getting, but really that quality, and that it be clean energy. And in some states in the U.S., you can choose your energy provider. Here in Texas, you can choose among many different folks. If you want hydro, if you want wind, if you want solar, if you want a blend of those things, you can get it. In other states, that's much more difficult. In Virginia, that's not the option. You either get power or you don't get power. You don't have that choice necessarily. And in Maryland, you can have that choice, but the transaction cost is very high. So one of the elements and policies that we're very interested in is seeing more energy competition and choice at the retail market level, not just at the wholesale market level. But also we're in favor of responsible net metering policies that establish a reasonable rate for people to be able to take control of their own power destiny. And if they want to put some solar on their rooftop, that it's not the government and it's not the local utility that's saying no to them. Sure, there are a lot of costs that need to be figured out with that, and certainly those are local solutions, but that's where we are very much interested in trying to find states and particular policies that really do empower states, empower individuals, and empower corporations to move the needle towards clean energy.
Okay, so when you talk about net metering and solar, what you're talking about is the fact that people with solar panels, for example, on their roofs can actually send energy back, send electricity back into the grid.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of discussion of how much should they be paid for that. Should they?
Sure.
Of course, if you're a homeowner, you want to be paid at the retail rate.
Absolutely.
And if you're a utility and you're taking in that electricity, you would like to pay that homeowner at the wholesale rate.
Right.
And then there can be a very substantial difference between those two.
There really can.
So what does CRES think about? What's the solution there?
Every state and situation is going to be a little bit different. We're bigger champions of paying people at that wholesale rate, because if you're going to be an independent power provider, you get the joy and satisfaction of having generated that power at home. But if you're selling to your neighbor, you shouldn't be being subsidized, exactly, for that sale. And so we are sensitive to that concern.
And one of the arguments, I mean, there are arguments obviously for both, that the retail rate, if I'm a homeowner, I'm saying, hey, I'm giving you electricity, you're selling it at
Right.
retail, give it to me at retail, or maybe with a 10% reduction or whatever. If I'm the utility, I'm saying, hey, you're using the grid, you're using everything that,
Sure.
a system that we've built, that we've paid for, that we have to pay to maintain, so it's not reasonable that you get retail.
Exactly, and that's where as long as homes are interconnected, and even as long as microgrids are interconnected to the grid, we do want to be sensitive to that resiliency aspect of what the grid does provide. Because at the end of the day, if your local substation or microgrid does go out of power, you do want that ability to be able to draw power from other sources. And there's an economic value associated with that. And really, there's a lot of work to be done, and there's going to be a lot of interesting policy discussions as we move from an era where it was a simple, vertically integrated monopoly system for a long time to one where the lines are being blurred between producers and consumers. And you're going to see that more and more as the economy continues to shift towards distributed generation. As those price points come down, people will have more independence and choice to be able to do that. And so we're going to be a lot of those important conversations, and in fact, that's one of the areas where Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions has been having discussions with stakeholders, with elected officials, and leaders in Washington, D.C.
So as a group, in terms of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, when you look at big picture issues, two Republican icons, former secretaries of both state and treasury, George Shultz and Jim Baker, have led an effort through the Climate Leadership Council to basically propose a trade-off where in exchange for, in essence, a carbon tax, the idea would be to eliminate regulation so that there be more long-term stability as far as energy providers are concerned. What's CRES's position on that? Is that a good idea, a bad idea?
Our position is that this is an important conversation to engage in. And when we're talking about a federal carbon tax, we need to talk about the challenges that are associated with any federal effort of that kind. And at the end of the day, what we do need to realize, and folks don't often get credit for it, but there are carbon pricing systems that have been in place across the United States for over a decade already. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in New England, that includes Maryland, plus California, have cap and trade systems that are well established, well in place, and have been functioning for a decade. So when you talk about a federal carbon tax, the economists are right, and the economist inside of me knows that it's a simple solution. And if you can trade off some regulations for that tax, that could be an expedient way to do it. But then you're talking about redistributing where that tax money goes and what states have been able to use for investment in renewable energy, clean energy, and infrastructure in their own states. So you're going to set up a very difficult conversation between the federal government and states in terms of how those revenues are going to be used. It's a critical conversation, and I think that when you look at the generation that's up and coming, millennials are very interested in this subject, and it's something where Republicans need to be able to talk about climate change. They need to be able to talk about carbon pricing. And they need to talk about how the federal government can empower individuals, states, and businesses to take action. Otherwise, that's a whole voting block that we have the potential to miss out on.
All right, we're going to take our last break. We'll be right back with Charles Hernick in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our last segment with Charles Hernick. So I'd be really interested in your take on what would be the difference if Republicans were proposing solutions and Democrats were proposing solutions for a path to clean energy. How would you characterize those two?
Sure. That's a great question, Aaron. And I think that conservatism is about limited government and empowering individuals to make their own decisions. And you're seeing that at a critical example of that in South Carolina. I was with a conservative thought leader, Eric Erickson, and we did an event in South Carolina to talk about, net metering and the situation that's going on there. The story in South Carolina is that over the past decade, the deciders, the people in charge of electricity in South Carolina, decided that the best path forward was to invest billions of dollars in nuclear energy. And nuclear has an important role in our country, and it will for decades and decades. But they made some investment decisions that have ratepayers paying millions of dollars a week for a power plant, 2 power plants in fact, that are never going to see the light of day. Now, that's in the backdrop of this net metering conversation where people have the power or the decision to go with government and go with the regulators have decided that is charging them money for electricity they're never going to see and use versus something that is much more tangible where they have the ability and power to be independent and they have the freedom to choose with something like rooftop solar and net metering.
And so,
that's not a silver bullet option.
Just so it's clear, you mentioned electricity they'll never see, and that's because even though investment has been made in those plants, the reality is they're not going to be completed, they're not going to come online.
That's true.
And that's because the cost estimates have exploded from what they were initially.
That's exactly right. And so that situation in South Carolina has painted a picture where mega investments that have led to failure put a pretty big black eye on central generation and distribution, and have really, in that one state, pushed a different approach. So what we're interested in doing is we're interested in seeing how we can look at government regulation and government barriers to innovation to make sure that there's space for more battery storage, grid level storage. And just a couple of weeks ago, FERC made a decision that is going to make that easier to be able to bring electricity storage onto the market. And we're looking at other opportunities for really understanding how to keep the road simple for businesses and for individuals to be able to act, to be able to make their investments. And getting back to those tax cuts, the lower overall tax cut makes it more competitive for U.S. businesses to be able to innovate, to be able to bring foreign profits home, to be able to innovate here at home, but also paying a lower domestic tax rate so that we can compete internationally since we're not paying an unnecessarily high tax rate. We'll hopefully be able to generate jobs, generate investment, and really push America onto a platform of global leadership, not just in areas where we are establishing better leadership, such as in natural gas and liquefied natural gas exports. That's critically important. But in those next generation technologies that consumers are demanding already here in the U.S., and we know that there are major markets for in Africa and Asia and Latin America.
So, in regard to the tax cut, there seemed to be very widespread agreement that going down from a rate of 35% to 21%, the ultimate number, made a lot of sense. I was surprised, since the president touts himself as such a great deal maker, that he didn't get much in return for that. I thought he had a great opportunity to say, we're going to cut that rate to 21%, but in exchange, we're going to, kind of in the Republican mantra that you discussed, we're going to simplify the tax code. We're going to get rid of a number of corporate tax loopholes, make it simpler. And so the companies then that operated efficiently and who were not making decisions based on tax preferences, special deductions, credits, et cetera, they would benefit the most. So I was surprised the president did not take advantage of that opportunity, because the flip side of that, and I'd be interested in your concern, is that it's clear that the path we're on is one now, because we didn't eliminate in any substantial manner those loopholes and other giveaways. We're on a path where we're going to be looking at increased annual federal deficits and certainly adding substantially to the national debt.
Yeah.
How does that concern? Does that concern you?
Oh, it's of absolute concern. And I think that your question earlier in terms of how Republicans and Democrats view these issues differently, at the end of the day, I don't want to see any different or special treatment for clean energy technologies, because I'm a firm believer that these are technologies that can and should compete as long as the field is level. Now, we get there taking some baby steps, and I think we get there by opening up the conversation and being honest and forthright about what our expectations are, both in the short run and the long run. And when you talk about some of these tax credits and loopholes, which is a popular way to talk about it, but it's also part of the way that the business has been designed over time, and it's part of the assumptions and expectations that businesses and investors have. And so to take them all away at once, as much as I would like to see that, would be a major shock to the market. And so it makes it so that we have to keep working on it.
All right. Well, I like that. I like that optimism. One last question. What would you like to see done by the government that would accelerate the both creation and adoption of clean energy technologies so that we move quicker to a clean energy scenario?
Sure. I think that one of the things that government can do, overall, the role for innovation and capturing those new markets and identifying what that next frontier of energy production and, in fact, energy efficiency is going to look like, that's all in the private sector. The government can help, though, too, and there are a handful of Department of Energy programs that provide seed funding for ideas and technologies that the market just hasn't fully valued. And I think that that's one of those areas where we don't want to see cuts to those Department of Energy programs that, on the whole and on the grand scheme of things, don't cost that much. And we talk about millions of dollars that are being spent, and certainly we want to be accountable for every taxpayer dollar that is being spent. It's an area where the Chinese are making investments on the order of billions of dollars, and we're making investments on the order of millions. And I don't want to be in the business of competing toe-to-toe with the Chinese on tax breaks and subsidies, but we do want to make sure that the U.S. government is doing its part to help American entrepreneurs and provide some of that seed funding for what could be some of the next best ideas.
Fair enough. Charles, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
It's great having you from the group, the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions.
There we go.
Thanks for being here. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.